Welcome back to episode number 3 of the Hi-Fi Viewer. It's the end of the day. I'm wrapping up, having a beer. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm kind of tired, but I wanted to get this video done today, so we're gonna get it done today. I'll say that I've been paying closer attention to other videos on YouTube, and I realize I got a little ways to go with camera quality and such, but I'm working with what I got for the time being, so we'll get there. Yeah, so in this video we're going to go through the rest of my system. Last video we kind of went through the sources and then ended at the preamp, so we'll pick up where we left off from last time. I'm currently listening to Theo Hill record that's on Positone, Interstellar Adventures. If you're a jazz fan and want to hear some new stuff coming out, well, you probably, if you're a jazz fan, probably already know about Positone, but if you don't know about Positone, you should check them out. They're a rad label, they put out good stuff. So we're gonna pick up where we left off. My preamp is a shit audio saga. I also got this this winter, shortly after Christmas time. I had my eye on these since they came out, and I can't really say enough good things about this preamp. So the Saga is a line stage, 5 line level inputs. It's got 2 RCA outputs. It's got a tube buffer stage, and so you can either run it passive or you can run it with the tube buffer. I, along with everyone else that has the Saga, pretty much always runs it with the tube buffer. I will say I do use it sometimes with the passive stage as the tube is warming up. So if I'm like impatient and I want to listen to music, the first 45 minutes or so after I turn it on, I'll listen in the passive just because the tube's not quite warmed up yet. It doesn't quite sound as good. Once it's warmed up, it pretty much always sounds better. It's got with the tube buffer, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the tube is. And I'm just using the one that's stock, that came stock with it. I've read some stuff about other, obviously, anytime with tubes, you roll tubes and find ones that sound better. But I'm still just running the stock tube. But with the tube buffer, it's the bass becomes fuller, thicker, more articulate, and it just gives it a little bit of the signal a boost. Nothing crazy. It doesn't make the signal way louder, but it does give it a bit of a boost. You can see these buttons. This is for the selector, so push through that. 5 inputs. This is where you can go from, so passive, tube buffer on, tube buffer off. I don't know if via my phone and then YouTube you can hear the difference. In my room you can definitely hear a difference though. Some people complain about the volume pot. It's you can go to the site and read. I can't remember exactly what the it's got contact points, so I think on this one it's 36 contact points, and people complain about that clicking. I couldn't give 2 shits less, haha, no pun intended, but I don't notice it. It doesn't bother me. Some people also complain that the power switch is on the back. I don't know if you can see it, it's right there. Again, I don't know, I always have stuff so that I can access the back. If I had a tighter equipment rack, it may be an issue, but then with that tube on it, you don't want it super enclosed anyway, so it's just not a big deal to me. I paid $2.99 for the Saga, which I think is all of shit stuff is very reasonably priced, and I think the Saga is no different. For $2.99, you cannot. I think regular price is $3.29, but I got it on their B stock or whatever returns page, and I can't see any blemishes on it, so it must have been a return, which I don't know why a person returned it, but they did. It also comes with a little plastic remote job. You can do volume, obviously source selection, and then you can turn the tube buffer on and off with it, like I just did. Again, some people complain about this little jobby and say it's a cheap piece of junk, which it is, but if your dog chews it up, you can replace it for $7, as opposed to, some preamps where you're paying an extra $1,000 just for the laser cut from a solid piece of aluminum remote control that does absolutely nothing to make the thing sound any better. It just makes you feel more important when you're turning the volume up and down on your preamp. And if that's what you're into and that's what you need to feel validated, have at it. Personally, I'll take the little cheap jobby that does the job just fine, that I don't have to worry about if I break it, what it's gonna take out a second mortgage to replace remote control on my line stage. So from the Saga, we go to the AMC 2100 amplifier, solid state amplifier. 100 watts into 8 ohms, I believe 150 watts into 4 ohms, which is what it is doing as we listen, talk, view. So my acquisition of the 2100 happened that was probably 20 years ago now. A good friend of mine, who you will probably see at some point on this channel, had bought in the 2100 to power some speakers and like a second system. And at the time we were both kind of still, you know, like big tube aficionados, like tubes this, tubes that, but he wanted something that he didn't really have to want to worry about and keep, you know, turned on all the time. And so he got the 2100, and I remember the day he got it, he brought it over to my house, and we plugged it into my system at that time, and both of us were just like offended at the shrillness that we were being exposed to from the amplifier. It was just terrible. And so he took it back and proceeded to use it for just a purely utilitarian you know, application. He wasn't really overly concerned about the quality of the sound. Fast forward a couple of, I don't know how long, maybe 6 months to a year maybe, and I had gotten some new speakers. They were Acoustic Energy HS3s, which I still actually have in another system that you'll see in a later video. But my first, like, before that, all of the speakers I had were like homebrew speakers that me and my dad, or my dad and I had built, and so I got these first, like, you know, audiophile speakers. Well, they're audiophile speakers. I don't care what anyone says. They don't have to cost $1 million to be audiophile speakers, and I still love those speakers. I've listened to those speakers a ton. Anyway, that's a different story. So I had gotten those speakers, and for some reason, I cannot remember why, but my buddy Eric brought that amplifier back over to my house, and we plugged it in, and it was a completely different experience through those speakers. I mean, it was almost like that amplifier was made to drive those speakers. Plus, it had had 6 months or a year or whatever it was to fully break in. I mean, I think when we first heard it that first day, part of the problem was it was just, it hadn't been broken in yet. So with those Acoustic Energy speakers, I just totally fell in love with the amplifier, so much so that I had a pair of Antique Sound Lab Wave 8s, little 8-watt push-pull monoblock amps that Antique Sound Lab made back, you know, again, geez, that was 15, 20 years ago. I had those amplifiers, and I loved those speakers so much, or I loved that, the 2100 so much, that I offered Eric I'd trade him the Antique Sound Labs, which he had another pair of, and he was going to use a second pair to buy amp some speakers if he would trade, and he agreed to it, and I've never looked back. And I know that there are people up there of higher means, higher snob appeal, who've got a more expensive car parked in their garage than I do, that would turn their nose up at such an amplifier. I love the thing. I've used plenty of other solid state amps, Class D amps, other solid state amps, and I always come back to a 2100. I mean, for the money, I think they list for $500, but you can find them new on the internet for $200. For the money, I just, for my ears and for what I appreciate, the thing is musical. You know, certain amps do other things better, but as the complete package of just being a musical amp, which I know that adjective musical, when describing audio equipment, means different things to different people. To me, like, for bang for the buck, I have never found anything that can top it across multiple like across mating it with multiple speakers. Which brings me to my speakers in this room. So the current speakers I'm using in this system, which I've had for a number of years now, are the Magnapan MMGs. And these came after having a pair of Magnapan, essentially the same speakers as what the MMGs are, but I can't remember what the model name is, but they're the ones that came out before the MMGs. Again, essentially the same thing. The ribbon for the tweeter, and then the copper coils, whatever they call them, for the mid and the bass. That first pair, I was at a vintage clothing store one day, and they had those speakers there, and I asked the guy what he wanted for them, and he said $90. And like, obviously I knew what Magnepans were, but I had never had like direct experience with them in my own home. So I was like, well, for 90 bucks, I'll bite. Like, I'll buy him. I got him to agree to give me 24 hours to take him home, and if there was anything wrong with him, I could bring him back. I took him home, and man, I tell you what, I immediately fell in love with those speakers. They did more right than they did wrong in terms of what I have wanted for speakers, and have been searching for a speaker that could do, like, it checked off more boxes than any speaker I think I've ever had has done. And I paid 90 bucks for them. Something weird happened with them as a result, coincidentally or not, when there was like a little short in my a step-up transformer I was using with my cartridge at the time, and one of the speakers, like, I've never been able, the highs sound super muffled, and I've replaced everything I can possibly replace, including replacing the ribbon, and I cannot get the things to sound right. I've talked to Wendell at Magnepan. I love the speakers that they create, but I will say that their follow-up when something goes wrong is not the greatest. I've tried everything, including like delivering them to Magnepan to be fixed, and they're kind of just like, buy a new pair of speakers. Like, we recommend you just buy a new pair of speakers, which kind of bums me out. But nonetheless, I found these MMGs that I have now a number of years ago, used, some guy in Canada, and bought them from him for what I thought was a pretty good deal. And I love these speakers, although once I got them, I found that the left speaker, it's, anyone who knows anything about Magnepans knows about them delaminating, and I'm having that experience with one of the speakers with the copper coil delaminating from the diaphragm. I've tried to fix it numerous times, and it's big fat pain in the butt. Again, I feel like what you get with Magnepans is so incredibly reasonable. Like, what they do and what it costs to get that in terms of high-end audio is, they're just a steal. But when something goes wrong with them, it's just it is a pain in the butt. However, these speakers are still hanging on, and it's not unless I'm playing something with a lot of low frequency stuff, information, and I've got it cranked, that it even becomes an issue. At normal listening levels, it's zero problem, and I can live with it. Magnepan recently came out with those LRSs, which essentially replace the MMGs, and I'm incredibly curious to hear those. I've heard nothing but great things, and for the, what, 600 bucks, whatever they cost, 650 to 550, I can't remember, whatever it costs to get them, I'm chomping at the bit to hear them. I haven't gotten, one day I will hear them, one day. So anyway, the MMGs, like, entry level for sure, I get it, there's far better out there, but for the money, they're finicky to set up. I will say that they are finicky to set up. You got to give them room to breathe. I mean, as you can see here, they're 2.5 feet from the sidewall at least. I don't know, 2.5, 3 feet, more than that, I'd say, from the back wall. I mean, when I set these up years ago, I had the exact measurements, but I found where they sounded best, and they haven't moved since. So finicky to set up, like, you have to have a room where they can breathe in. And my current listening room that we're in right now is 14 by 14. I think that these speakers are made for this room, but those of you that don't know what Magnepans are, they're dipoles, which means the same signal that comes off the front of the speaker is also coming off the back of the speaker. And one of the reasons you would want to do that is it cancels out side reflections, which gets into technical jargon that could be a whole separate video, but a result of it is the things image like a champ. They're articulate, they're fast, and I'm just gonna say the same thing that anyone's ever said that's talked about Magnepan speakers, but they just sound so, there's no box to muck up the sound, and to color the sound, and to slow things down, and to have slight variations in time due to echo and smearing of the sound. I mean, I love these speakers, I love them, and I really want to hear the new LRSs to see how they bettered on them. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about Magnepans. People will criticize them for not they are power hungry. You need a lot of power. So my AMC is 100, they're 4 ohm speakers, so My AMC is 150 watts into them at 4 ohms, and I wouldn't recommend any less than that. And again, I'm not in the biggest room in the world, but you know, they take power. I can't imagine them doing what they do on much less than 150 watts. I wouldn't definitely go below 100 watts, no matter, even if you listen at incredibly quiet levels. I mean, just for dynamic swing. That's another thing. Some people will say that they think they're compressed a little bit. They're not horn speakers. I've got some Zoo speakers in a different system that we'll get to later, and yeah, like those Zoos swing way better. They've got way more dynamic swing. But I don't know. It's just like they do so many things so well that I don't even notice that. I mean, I just don't even think about it because it's a different thing. It's like you know, when you ride a mountain bike, you don't compare it to a road bike because they do different things well, and you know, maybe that's a bad analogy. I don't know. I don't think that they're overly compressed the way some people say they are. I just love their articulateness, and the other thing people will criticize them for is their sort of lack of bass. I have since getting these speakers added a subwoofer, which we will get to in a second. But I think, and the subwoofer is definitely worth having. But I will say that without it, no, they don't go super low, especially these MMGs, because the surface area just isn't that big as opposed to some of their larger speakers that will go deeper. But the bass that is there is so articulate, so tuneful. It's, again, you don't get that boominess you get from a box. You know, like box speakers with woofers and subwoofers in them, they, especially if not properly placed, you get this boominess that's disproportionate to the music, that smears and slows everything down and just kind of sucks. And it's something you don't really realize sucks until you hear how good it can sound when it's gone. Like a lot of things in audio. Anyway, again, I think a subwoofer is almost a must. Once you do hear a subwoofer, you couldn't live without it. But even without it, I don't, you know, they are a little bass shy, but the bass that's there is definitely worth having.